All right, everybody, we are back on Play It Forward with Dhruv Sud, a filmmaker, writer, director of The Coronation. Dhruv, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. Would you like to announce, or describe, or what's really the word? Say anything about yourself or your film before we start.
Sure, yeah. I am a writer, director, as you already said. I'm currently sort of at the beginning of my career, and the film The Coronation was one of the first things I made. I made it in film school. I was at the graduate program at Columbia University, and so this was one of the projects that I made in that program. And it is about a young boy who goes out in drag for the first time. So yeah, that's
Cool.
the kind of general bird's eye view.
Thank you, Dhruv. Great place to be in the beginning of your career. It's awesome, and you're definitely in a good spot. You made a very sophisticated movie, and definitely. And the first question of Play It Forward is that seed, that kernel of the idea that you can, date back as far as you can. What was that inspired you to write and direct The Coronation?
Yeah, definitely. I remember, so I had the idea of making the film before I even applied to grad school. Like I had kind of thought I wanted my kind of first large project to be about drag because the film is in some ways loosely inspired by the story of its lead actor, who's the guy who plays the protagonist is one of my very close friends. And so when we lived together, and that was around in 2016, he had sort of just started to experiment with drag. And so I sort of saw the amount of work that was going to, and I met some queens, and I sort of started to have an introduction to the world. And I was like, wow, this is actually, when you see it from sort of behind the scenes, there's just so much work and talent that goes into being a drag queen that I was very inspired by that as someone who wanted to be an artist. I was like, look, these people are really doing it. And with no resources as well. And they're putting on insanely incredible shows, and they're makeup artists, they're costume designers, they're entertainers. They'll make their own mixes. So I just was really in awe of all that sort of talent that was there. And at that point, drag ended up becoming really mainstream in the time that it took me to make this movie. I'm sure anyone who's watching this who's a filmmaker knows it like takes a long time to get anything together, to be able to shoot it after the concept. So I knew I had the initial concept of wanting to sort of make this movie that sort of was inspired by my friend's journey. He didn't end up actually becoming a full-fledged drag queen, but I met so many incredible drag queens through him. And so I sort of fictionalized his story as well as took elements of my own sort of upbringing and things like that. And then it was sort of certain images that kind of came to me in the movie, like him in the pool or like him in the house, or like the moment when he sees the drag queens for the first time and they sort of ask him. So I think those also ended up being a large part of how the film sort of kind of came together, because I was really looking at drag as this very visual medium. So for me, it felt like images for this story kind of came before the script. And then I was kind of figuring out a way to sort of distill the script into kind of the most, I guess, easy to follow version of this journey. Yeah.
Yeah, the acting is really tremendous. They're, so talented in terms of makeup and delivery and just authenticity. Something that I am very much inspired to kind of explore with other artists is, when I have a creative inspiration for something, there's just, I don't know, sometimes it's so different. Sometimes it's a question, sometimes it's a theme or a part of life I want to explore. There's some tension that is unresolved in me that kind of says, all right, I want to develop this into something. So in terms of, you've definitely described a lot of the mechanics externally that were kind of going wrong or wrong kind of going on, but in terms of like that generative idea or explorative theme or feeling, can you kind of define what that might have been?
Yeah, I think for me it was isolation and community, if that makes sense. Like
For
really trying
sure.
to explore sort of how I think specifically queer youth can be really isolated, and that an experience of being a queer person who's young, I think in today's day and age and always, is a very isolating experience unless you have community. Um, And so I think that for me, that was something that I've always been trying to explore. And I try to explore my work in general, is the idea of, yeah, I guess queer community and the dynamics of, how to exactly how to enter and then be within a community, and sort of where you have similar interests and you have sort of a similar kind of life understanding, if that makes sense, and perspective.
For sure. Yeah. And, to kind of, help us move on to the second question is, that isolation and community. I mean, any, really resonant work of art resonates beyond its, specific kind of
Absolutely.
thing. And so isolation and community, I mean, we can all relate to that.
100%.
And for me, it really kind of revolved around the idea of home.
Mhm.
Especially, how you said it in the opening of, a young boy, young adolescent coming of age, not really being comfortable
Mhm.
at home or in himself, um, and then finding this alternate world that can, bring out that comfort. So that dynamic, that play, for home, isolation, community, belonging, thematically, what do you see now as a viewer after having made the film? How do you interpret the message of the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely what you said in terms of like home and because I know like I having screened the movie, a decent amount of times, like I've had a lot of like straight men come up to me and be like, I really empathized with this movie. I felt like I understood the characters. Like a lot of it also had to do with anxiety and things like that, and how hard it can be to just be yourself in any sort of situation. And yeah, how exactly to feel at home. If you don't feel at home in your own home, how are you going to understand how that feels? How do you receive love from other people or receive acceptance from other people. And I think that can be a really sort of challenging thing if it's not something you're grown up and sort of used to doing. And that was one of the things I was interested in exploring in this movie. And I think that sense of belonging or feeling not belonging or feeling, if you're not sure if you belong in a certain place, I think that is a universal experience to sort of any human being. Yeah.
Yeah. That really helps, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course. When you said, and that is what I think we can all resonate with is, um, if we're not feeling loved at home, how do we learn to love ourselves?
Mhm.
And then even more so, how do we learn to accept love from
Mhm.
others? And that, is a profound thing that we all wrestle with beyond the, identities of, our gender or sexuality, whatever that is. And, on a soul level, that is what we all wrestle with at one point in our life. And, if we are, and I'd like to look at your movie as an instructive way, how do we accept that love from others and ourselves? And how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and I think even through making the movie, I think it's being able to sort of express yourself in a way where you feel safe around other people. And I think that it takes time, it takes experience, it takes sort of people. And that's one thing I really do feel specifically about the drag community is there's a real sort of, I think because a lot of queer kids are sort of lost souls, and a lot of people who end up doing drag are lost souls, or have complicated family histories. There's this sort of sense of nurturing that a lot of drag queens I feel like innately just have in terms of younger queens. Like they really do, take these people all on under their wing, and they show them and teach them how to do makeup, and they teach them sort of how exactly to be in a family. And I mean, drag families are very much a real thing, and you can have a drag mother. And I think that those sort of relationships, I think even outside of the queer community, like you can figure out ways to receive that love that may be unconventional or may not be the way that you initially expected to receive love. And I think from there, um, I think once you receive love, that can be a really, really powerful thing. I think that's one thing that the movie really does try and show is like just the tiniest moment of acceptance or love or understanding can sort of change someone's life and change their whole understanding of themselves. And I think that, ideally, it can come from a place that's internal, but I think a lot of times in real life, it comes from something external. It comes from some sort of validation or seeing yourself in someone else and someone else recognizing that. And I think that's, the ideas I was playing with.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's really, reflecting on the movie and reflecting on just humanity. Um, the ability to express, yourself on the deepest level of what you feel is your truth, you
Mhm.
know, um, and then to have that, it's kind of like that binary thing to have that expressed. So to be able to allow yourself to do that and to have it received, I think ultimately helps us receive it, accept it ourselves within ourselves. Like, oh yeah, it's okay
Mhm.
to do this, to be, to feel this,
Exactly.
Dhruv, last question, a play it forward is, did I say your name correctly? Because
Yes. Yes.
short-term memories,
No, you're great.
it's very poor. Taking some head wounds.
Mhm.
Dhruv, so how have you been changed since making the movie?
I think a lot. I think I've changed in a lot of ways. I think I've grown a lot as a filmmaker. I think one of the ways I've changed is like very practical in the way that I approach filmmaking is now that I'm very practical in approaching filmmaking because trying to shoot a film with drag queens in like 4 days and really limited resources in terms of being at, in a school, not having the majority of the crew being professional. It was a lot of my, student friends who were in the roles. And so I think just figuring out how to make a shoot manageable. This isn't exactly the most glamorous answer, but that is one thing that I really did learn from
Yeah,
this shoot. You have to when you have a lead actor who's has to spend like 3 hours getting into makeup every day.
yeah.
It's going to be difficult to balance when you also have these crazy camera shots and experimental moves and all these things that you're planning and this blocking and extras and all of that. So I really did learn to you know figure out how to keep a shoot manageable because the more of those elements you have, the more you sort of have to focus on things that don't end up being as important to the story as the things that you want to get to. I think I learned the importance of incredible actors. The drag queens in that film are so strong and they're so natural, and I think a lot of that was just who they were as performers, and I was so blessed to cast them. So I shout out to them because they're all incredible performers. Zenobia, the Blair bitch, Bambina, and Yuha. Seriously, just like if you have the chance to see any of their shows or watch any of their online content, I highly recommend it because they always will turn the party. So I learned the importance of incredible creative collaborators both in front of and behind the camera. I had an incredible relationship with my cinematographer, and I feel like that film is what taught me how to work with a cinematographer, because if you work with one who's very narratively minded and really is trying to get to the heart of the story and how do we shoot that versus someone who's maybe more visually like not visually minded but more about the shots themselves versus the meaning of the shots.
Mm,
So I think that to me was also really important. I'm trying to
great
think what else
point.
yeah, I think a lot of it was sort of learning from my collaborators. I was really sort of blessed to have the people that I did have on the movie, and yeah, keeping things manageable. And then I think also like sticking to your guns as a filmmaker. Like I had a lot of when I remember writing the script, a lot of people didn't want me to shoot the opening sequence. They wanted the film to start in the apartment, because I think it was like about a page of kind of just description of what was happening in the opening. And I really resisted that to the point that the workshop was like my professor told the workshop, like, you can't give him this note anymore. He's not going to take it. So you have to give him other notes.
uh,
And I'm really grateful for that because, the opening to me is really important for the movie. And I think I'm incredibly happy that I got to shoot it. And I don't think the movie would work unless you understood where he came from. And I think that was something that only really I saw in the script stage. And then by the end of making the movie, other people understood why I felt so strongly that needed to be there. And once I shot it, I never got the note, cut the opening, and just start at the beginning of in the thing in the room. So I do think there are certain things. I think as a director, you should be open to discussion. You should think about if a shot is more important as a shot or a story moment. But I do think that there are certain things that maybe if you're really, really set on them, or you really think that they're right for the story, I do think that sometimes it's important to stick your guns as the director, because especially on a short, you're going to be pulled in so many different ways. Budget's going to be an issue, timing is going to be an issue. So all those things, I think, needless to say, is like, what exactly do you really need from the movie? And I think I was able to figure that out kind of through making this. And I think this movie has shown me for my next films, like when I'm thinking about if I need something or if I don't need it, I look back to this movie and think about the things that I thought I needed, or the things that maybe I wish I didn't have in the movie, and things like that. So.
Cool. And by shot versus story moment, I think what you mean, just to confirm, is the difference between, maybe a pretty shot or attractive visual and something that's really necessary to telling the arc.
Exactly. Yeah,
Gotcha.
exactly. If it's like, oh my God, this is an incredible tracking shot. It took us like 10 takes to
Right.
get it right. It's so nice. It like really works in the film, or like really works as a shot alone, but it's like taking up too much time. It's like doing something that just isn't really helping us for the narrative. And I think in this movie, there was in the apartment, there's a second part of that scene where they put him in a dress and they do all this other stuff with him. And it just didn't really add to what we had already shot, because we'd already kind of seen the beginning of a transformation. And even though it was really nicely shot and there was really great performance beats in there, it just didn't end up. And there were other moments. There was something about tucking, which I really loved in the script. It's one of my favorite sort of moments, as we shot kind of them outside, him in the bathroom, and he's like trying to tuck it inside, which is like,
you mean tucking the junk?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So he's trying to tuck his junk, which is a very specific thing and very specific to the drag world. But the timing of that shot didn't end up really working in the movie, because it was like, we just want to get to the club, So it kind of the two sides of that battle, right? Of like, figuring out what you need and what you don't need. And I think you can only really figure that out once you start to shoot your own stuff, because then you see which parts of your writing sort of come up again, or like are things that you'll look out for your next movie. So
yeah, cool. I mean, it sounds like definitely have gained experience, knowledge, wisdom as a filmmaker. If you had to summarize personal growth,
I mean, I think that this is the movie that I basically, like, after I made this movie, I was like, I'm a director. So I think that was a massive personal growth for me. I didn't think I could do it beforehand. And this set, it was a massively difficult set, as I kind of alluded to, because of all the, sort of things that we had to deal with as a production. But it really did show me that I could weather sort of any storm as a director, and that I have a vision, and that I'm willing to stick to it, and that I know what I want as a director. And those are all things that I think are really, a lot of directors, not a lot, but some directors don't have that. Like, they will get on set and sort of try and figure it out, or have an idea of ways things can go. And I feel like for me, I'm very specific about those things. And I think that for me, it was like, this film was one where I was like, oh, wait, I can direct. I have the ability to translate the things that I believe are important about a script into sort of the world. And I learned how much I love directing. Like, I love that collaborative sort of aspect of filmmaking, where you're sort of working with everybody individually and together to build, a cohesive project and tell a story all together. And I found that exhilarating. And I think for me, that was probably the biggest personal growth of this film. Was really it was the film where I realized, like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is the part of filmmaking I'm interested in.
That's huge. And it's so speaks to your narrative as well. There's that coming out and acceptance.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Dhruv Sud.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for
so
being
much.
on the show. Nominated by Emma Hallmartin. Film is Coronation. Till next time, everybody, on Play It Forward. All right. Thank you again, Dhruv.
Thank you again.
All right. Let's